everybody. And I would say for me, things got started very early. Very, very early indeed. I can see the first signs of gaming addiction show up in my life around the age of 6. A friend of mine had a computer. My family had a computer, but my parents was very strict limits in terms of how much time we could play on any given day. And for the most part, I was what would have been called a good kid. I never even really thought about trying to sneak time outside of the 20 minutes I was allowed every day. But that was just a limit for at my parents' house. And so I would go over to this friend's house on a somewhat regular basis. We're pretty good friends. And, one of the first things we would talk about would always be, hey, what do you want to do today? And I would always, when we were at his place, I would always defer to him, because what I wanted to say was, well, let's go play games on your computer. But it felt weird for me to say that. And so I didn't. I would defer to him and was always kind of hoping he would suggest games. And some of the time we would play some kind of multiplayer game where we could both play. Sometimes it was a game where really would consist more of watching him than of me actually playing, but something about these games, like I wanted them, and I was willing to just sit there and watch somebody. And I didn't even have to play myself. I just had to be there when there was gaming. And I didn't really think much of it until an awful lot later. Because of that 20-minute limit, I never even really noticed my gaming get particularly out of control for a very long time. Very long time. So I'm actually going to fast forward a fair bit, just kind of touch on a few things through childhood, the teen years, and then drop you into life a little bit later on. But I was not particularly happy growing up, although I wouldn't find that out until much later. I did not feel particularly wanted, did not feel particularly cared for. Thought about suicide a lot as a young child. Found out about the second addiction that started around age 8. It's not the focus of this. I'm not going to go into that. That was kind of my mainstay for pain killing when I was a kid, because the gaming, I could only do so much per day. And I have a lot of siblings. Between my gaming and watching all of them game every day, 20 minutes per person. When you got 6 kids in the house, well, guess what? That's 2 hours a day. And we would watch each other game almost religiously. It's almost funny looking back on it now. It's like, wow, that was the almost need that some of us seemed to have, me in particular. But all of us would kind of like run over to watch whoever was playing. And didn't have a lot of friends. Was not particularly gifted in relating to people just by nature. And my family, as you may have guessed from what I've said already, was also not super gifted in that. It's not that my parents didn't care for us. It's not that we didn't care for each other. We just never really learned how to express that, how to actually live out the love that we had and still have for each other. We've gotten better in a lot of ways, but it's still something in my family that I see is we tend to be very self-absorbed and not very good at letting people know that we actually care about them. So grew up feeling pretty much unloved and wanted. That, I think, was a really big contributor to where the addiction came from me. It was a way to make the pain go away. I didn't recognize it, of course, for a long time, but that's what was there. There was a span of probably about 2 or 3 years, from probably about 16 until before I turned 19, where I had basically no friends. There were people that I knew. I would think of them as friends. I would call them friends, but in reality, we weren't really very close at all. I would recognize them. They would recognize me. We might even talk, but it wasn't anything really all that terribly close. And that was not pleasant. I told myself it was fine. I would rather be right than have friends, and that was kind of what I saw was the obstacle, was that I was really good at being right, and they couldn't deal with it, and that wasn't my problem. That was theirs. And there was some truth to that, but it still was not really a good place to be. And I was just trying to tell myself why it shouldn't hurt that I didn't have any friends. I had begun teaching myself to feel nothing at all at a very early age, and that was one example of how I did it. Was I would explain to myself why I I would prefer the situation I had, even though it hurt, compared to a situation that I might maybe be able to have if I changed something. So that was kind of my childhood, pretty lonely for the most part, pretty painful, although I didn't realize just how messed up it was until much later. And then anyway, I moved to my current city of Detroit in the fall of 2005. I've been here pretty much ever since, which is great. I really love the city, and it's been a lot of good things have happened here. But one of the things that happened was, not living with my folks. The restriction on gaming was not there, and I had a lot more freedom to game if I wanted to. I had enough stuff to do. This didn't necessarily get out of control, but I did notice myself very early on using gaming to hide from things I didn't really want to do. I really disliked the idea of looking for work, and that was one of the first things that I had to do, was find a job so I could pay rent and so on and so forth. And I had some money saved up, so I didn't need to have one right now, but I did need to look for a job, and then as now, it's not something I particularly care for. I don't enjoy it. It makes me uncomfortable. I found myself gaming a lot. I was just like, it's late enough in the day. I don't know that I have time to go look for work. It happened a fair bit, and that was kind of the first really obvious sign there was something really wrong with the way that I was gaming. Was just that I was gaming when I had other things that I really did need, in fact, to be doing. I wasn't doing them because I was gaming, and then it was like, oh, no, I can't. Shucks. And anyway, eventually I got a job. Eventually I started taking classes. And once again, all seemed to be well. The gaming kind of became a non-issue. I rarely, if ever, gamed. I went back to visit my family, so I would game a fair bit. That was just kind of the way things worked. It's like once I moved out, I wasn't really under the 20-minute restriction anymore, and I would game a lot more when I went back to my folks' place. One time I asked somebody to hang on to the discs that I had for the games that I had installed in my computer because I was just playing them, especially when I went back home. And then sometimes also when I was in the house I was staying in Detroit, it was just, I'd rather not play them. I want to be able to do other things with my life. So I had some recognition that there was an issue. I even took some steps to address it, but I had no idea just how big the issue really was and how much power it had over me. Then I eventually made the awful and unpleasant, in the end, discovery of Flash games, where I could just go online and I could play games that would last anywhere from a few minutes to however many hours I wanted to spend. And I started playing those a lot. Like, I didn't need my discs that way. All I needed was an internet connection. I could do this at school. I could find games that I enjoyed because there were so many different games out there. There was always going to be at least a few that I would find interesting. And so I started playing a lot. There was a few classes where the class was held in a computer lab, and I was good enough at what the topic was. I could pick up on it quickly enough and do well enough without really paying a lot of attention. But I would not infrequently game during those classes. So people around would be listening to the lecture and working, and I would just be gaming, and I would drop in from time to time mentally into what was going on enough to make sure I had some idea what was going on. And then I would just pick up everything in my other time. Not exactly a process that I would recommend, but it was working for me. I was still getting excellent grades. So as far as I was concerned, all was well. Fast forward a little bit further to 2011. Towards the end of 2011, I was starting to get into, I'd already done what was arguably the hardest classes that I was going to have to take. I was taking some extra classes. I was thinking about switching from, I wasn't thinking about, I was planning on at that point finishing my degree in engineering, and then I was going to go and degree, and I had that all planned out. I knew how that was going to happen. Because the intensity level of the classes that I was taking had dropped off, I had more free time than I was used to. And of course I filled that with gaming, and it was great, and I thought all was well. And then I started to notice that I was beginning to have to rush to get homework assignments done, and I didn't have them done well in advance like I used to. And that was unsettling. And I started to feel really bad about this. It started to really bother me because I was starting to go, you know, I want to stop. And I would go into school going, I'm not going to game today because I don't want to game today. And inevitably, I would start gaming at some point during the day. There might be like a 3 or 4 hour break between one class and the next. Be like, hey, I'm going to game for a few minutes and then I'll do homework, go to the next class, and it's going to be great. And I would show up to class like a minute and a half before it started. And I had not planned on gaming for hours, and then I'd been gaming for hours. And so the more that the evidence started to build up that I had a problem, the more it bothered me that I would game. It's like it bugged me. It felt like, man, this is just games, and not just games. This is just flash games. This is the lowest common denominator, if even that. And it's killing me, and I want to stop, and I can't. What is wrong with me that I can't stop?